And I'm really excited to hear you and Jeff. I really liked your paper. I thought it was a really great paper, and I totally concur that the orchestration is a really important part of the process. You know, it's kind of the missing link in a lot of ways. So
yeah.
Hey, John.
Hey.
Hey, Rob. This is Balaji.
Hey, Balaji. BB. See you, man. How are you? You're here. Good.
I'm driving back. I was at a board meeting in about 250 miles away, so I decided to just drive.
Ah, perfect. You got lots of time to be on the call. Awesome. Yeah. That sounds good. Well, welcome.
Very good. Hey, John, did you reference that you got the book out to the publishers? You want to kind of give us any more of an update so people have a sense of kind of where?
Yeah, totally. As Jeff knows, you know, what a process, right, Jeff? Exactly. Yeah, you know, it's been a good long journey, and I think the hard, you know, like I wrote a blog post yesterday and just said, you know, it's sort of like trying to fly a plane and build it at the same time. I have to really, you know, just share my gratefulness for Diane and Barry and Bryn, who are actually out working with so many great clients and doing the consulting work to really figure this stuff out. It's one thing for me to sit around and you know, be the entrepreneurial guy and, you know, throw shit against the wall and hope it works. It's another thing to actually see the guys take some of the theories that we've all worked on for, you know, a few years as a group and actually go out and see, like, lo and behold, some of this stuff works, and, you know, and some of this stuff needs to be modified a little bit. But yeah, lots of really great momentum, helping organizations kind of jump into this. And I think we've created a pretty good process for the adoption of open talent. And so the book went off to the publisher yesterday, or actually on Monday, and it's in its, you know, as Jeff knows, it's finding its own way through the process. So you know, we'll see when it's out.
The challenge, John, is as Robin and I know, we'll talk about some of our work in a second. You send it to the publisher, and the next thing you know, they send it back.
Exactly, right. I know, exactly.
And then you send it to them, and they send it back, and then, you know, it is the slowest of processes that exist in the 21st century economy, is the way we publish books. So
I know, it's crazy, right? And one of the things that I just, you know, one of the things we decided to do is get some editorial help, and you know, the really wonderful guy that helped us out, Arthur Goldwag. He started off in his introduction. He's like, "Well, my job wouldn't exist if publishers just did their jobs." And I'm like, well, that's a great signal to a really, you know, great industry, right? It's like, oh, you know, we'll do the book for you, but we're not really going to do the editing part of it or anything like that. So, you know, we'll kind of, you know, do the marketing and things like that. So we'll see. I mean, I'm kind of in the beginning of that. How is the book coming for you guys? Is it locked and loaded? Is it done?
Yeah, Robin, why don't you summarize that? Actually, Robin, why don't you summarize that?
Yeah, we were going to talk about it in our presentation too.
Okay, good. We can do that.
Locked and loaded, except for keeps going back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, everybody has to have their hands on it, right? Like it's just part of the process. So.
Well, before we dive in, and I'm going to get to Robin and to Jeff quickly, but I do want to just give a quick reference to everyone that the directory that we've talked about for a long time has been published now. So I'll just drop a link into the chat so you can take a look at it. Encourage you guys to go in and look and see the members of the CTW community that want to go ahead and modify their platform and make sure we've got the story right. Have the ability to do that. We'll get that all set up. Tom Matthews gets full credit for getting this set up there. If there are other platforms that need to be entered into it, let us know. Send Brandon or myself or Tom a note, and we'll make sure we keep building that out. But we're trying to just keep making progress on these goals that we put forward to get some things out there. So we're excited about it. Encourage everyone to kind of take a look in. Tell us what we've missed. Tell us how we can make it better, make it more useful for you. Kind of looking to answer a simple question of which platform's right for me, and whether that's because you're a worker looking for the right type of opportunity, or a business trying to find freelancers and get some work done. Just let us know how better to use this as a tool and as a resource that we're making available to the public at no cost. So excited about what's there, and just kudos to Tom.
Yeah, John, just to add, I think, when we started this group, the two things that we were really concerned about is how do we create common language and common processes, right? And again, the great work by Diane and the crew on, getting out and working with companies to do that. That's really awesome. And we've had some big effect, big, progress there, but it's really hard to do analog, right? It's really hard to change processes and language in an analog way. And so really our hope is to, create this platform where we can kind of create, common language, common processes. And this is the start of that journey. One of the things that as I was researching the book that I was really interested in is, well, we think in this group, because we're all early adopters and we've been doing this stuff for a while and we're so deep in the woods, 3/10,000ths of the companies that platforms work with or of platforms customers are enterprise customers. So you've got, it's very, very, very early days that, folks that have signed on for enterprise relationships with platforms. And so, the good work that Robin and Jeff are doing out there really help bring that common understanding and the common processes to bear, because it's going to take all of us to lift this up if the world's really going to change, so that we can bring these ideas forward, but we can also make working conditions better for everyone, freelancers especially. And John, the good work that you're doing at CTW really is at the tip of the spear of that.
Cool. All right. Well, we attracted people into this call with a promise of a fun conversation. So we've got Jeff Schwartz, who's the Senior Advisor for the Future of Work at Deloitte, as well as being the VP of Insights and Impact at Gloat. And then Robin Jones, who's Principal for the U.S. Workforce Transformation Leader, also at Deloitte, who are here. And we're going to kind of turn the call over to them. John Windsor, anything else you want to add in about kind of the debates that you and Jeff have had that have kind of shaped much of our early evolution?
I don't know if there were debates. I mean, these guys are just these guys are the experts of the world, and Jeff's been doing this work for longer than anybody. And so I think learning from these guys is really just an honor to have you guys here and share your ideas, and hopefully it opens up some debate, and we can all learn from it. So looking forward to it.
No, we're glad to be here, and Robin's going to kick it off because you just called me old, John, so I don't want to say anything. Sorry, Robin.
Okay. Is the deck sharing for you all?
It is.
Okay, well, I got one thing correct so far, so not always the smoothest. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having us today. And as I had a lovely conversation with Cynthia Hansen a minute ago, it's my first time joining this group. I've heard so much about it from both Jeff and Balaji. So it's really great to be a part of the conversation and learn from this esteemed group about a topic, as you said, we're so passionate about. We only have, less than 10 slides, 2 of which are pictures of Jeff and I, which you can already see. And we have this model on the cover, but this is actually part of the content. And we're going to get into this model as we talk more about the how of workforce ecosystems and the orchestration. But that's towards the end of this presentation. We're going to spend maybe 15 minutes total walking you through our research, how we got here, and some of the prior research that led up to this. And then we want to have a conversation. So I'm going to jump into it. Here you go. I think we've been introduced. You all know Jeff so well. And as John said, I do lead workforce transformation at Deloitte and future of work, and have been a student of this topic for many, many years, but love talking to client organizations every day as they work through challenges and opportunities in this space.
Robin, Robin, can we go back to the last slide? I think Allison Ryder is on the call as well. So,
oh, right.
And Allison, Allison is, I can't remember, everybody's title changes, but one of the
okay.
who works with us at MIT Sloan Management Review. She and I have been working together on this research for 3 years now. So just briefly introduce yourself, Allison, if you can. I know we're putting you on the spot, but that's what we do.
Yeah, apparently I did not realize how interactive this was. I was invited to this session by
Welcome to the
Elizabeth
crew.
Thank you. It was great. It had a wonderful breakout before the session. It was all good. Yeah, I was made aware of the session actually by Elizabeth Altman, who I know is a friend of the group and the community. She's our lead researcher and guest editor at MIT Sloan Management Review. So she's been leading the future of workforce research in collaboration with Robin, Jeff, and also David Kieran from our team for the last 2 years. So my title at MIT SMR is Senior Project Editor, and what that essentially means is that I project manage and provide editorial consulting maybe and support on collaborative research programs that we undertake with organizations such as Deloitte that have thought leadership groups and practice areas that are looking to continue to enhance their thought leadership expertise in specific subject areas. So for a number of years, we had partnered with Deloitte actually on what we were calling digital leadership, which was essentially how organizations lead through digital transformation. And in 2019 is when we kicked off the research, actually made the shift to the future of workforce work and began working with Robin, Jeff, and team. So yeah, I'm joining more as a spectator, but I guess if there is anything that I can add for context or perspective, happy to do it. But just kind of riding along as we bring this research on the road. We published our study, the kind of flagship report just over 2 weeks ago. So really excited to share this work with you all and gather some feedback from various folks in the community about how this is resonating as we look at deeper at, what the complexities of the workforces that you're all grappling with and managing means. And I think the team has done a really excellent job at taking a step back and just exploring, well, what is a workforce and how do we define this and how do we start to manage these very different actors that don't necessarily mean employees or contractors or, part-time hired help, that it's much more complex than that, that we're looking at external organizations, we're looking at different supplier partners and all sorts of folks that, I'll let them get into all of that, but it has been very interesting to follow along with this team, and obviously really happy and proud that they're continuing this work and publishing a book on the topic. So don't want to take any more time from their talk.
Allison, that was great, and I'll hand it back to Robin. To that, I mean, I couldn't remember exactly what title. I was going to say, I wasn't sure if it was senior editor or senior project coordinator editor.
I've been asking for a title change for almost the full tenure I've had at SMR because it really to the outside world means nothing. It's kind of a program management, project management, and editorial role, if that clarifies things for folks. So I'm handling a lot of operations. I'm also producing podcast series and various other things.
And as I hand it back to Allison, as we hand it back to Robin, each of these reports you and I have worked with. We have seen the sausage go through the entire process. So I can't think of a better way to introduce it than to start by giving you a chance to talk about your role and the role at MIT SMR. Sorry, Robin, back to you.
No, thank you so much. And of course, we can't forget Allison, but also Elizabeth Altman and David Kieran, as Allison pointed out. They've been on the journey the whole way. And we're a little workforce ecosystem team. And we're always reminding ourselves we are living the dream, we're living what we're writing about, and we try and practice what we preach, but it's been a fun ride. So let me just, I don't know if everyone has read, followed the whole movie, if you will, and all the sequels that we've gone on here, but we'll make sure you have access to all these reports. Of course, you can Google them all now, except for the last one on the book, which will be coming next spring. But this all kind of started in 2019, pre-pandemic, where we got together around the big ideas research and started the first question or topic we honed in on was this massive disconnect between what the worker wants and what the organization is wanting to offer. And that led to, I often say to my clients and my team, I grew up in an era, being Gen X, of kind of you get what you get and don't get upset. And you learn to navigate how to not be upset, and you just kind of deal with it. And then the next generation and the generation after that, and the one that I'm graduating tonight, my son, they're coming along and they're like, we're not just going to sit there and just say we get what we get and don't get upset. We have a voice and we have bigger ambitions and we expect more. We expect more from the organization. So this whole topic around worker agency. and their ability to, and their desire to seek opportunities, and their currency being about, you know, their value, their worth is the experiences they have, the skills they gain, and the like. And when they join organizations or they choose places to work, they want that reciprocated. They want that to return to them, and they want to not be in, they want to be more fluid and mobile. And that led to this whole notion of a platform based, because platforms were available, we could make a marketplace. And the idea was not just a talent marketplace like a job board, but truly a place that inspires the organization and the worker to tap into the worker wanting to do more, learn more, grow more, create more impact in the world and in the organization with, and the people with whom they work. And the organizations themselves need more. They need and can't find the skills and the capabilities, or if they're making an investment, they want that investment to pay off. So that was really the start of this, and the notion of opportunity marketplaces. As we went into the next year, it really opened our eyes. The first question we asked after we published, so now we're in year 2020, we said, well, who is the workforce? And that became our opening question throughout the research. Who is your workforce? And every response was, oh gosh, that's an interesting question. It's like concentric circles. It's kind of a quilt. It's a patchwork. It's lots of different things, lots of different groups, lots of entities. And every organization we spoke to said very similar responses. And we started to realize, wow, these organizations don't even realize, unless you ask the question, that they have an expansive workforce. They have internal workers, external, they have gig, they have contractor, they have alliances who are co-creating stuff who they're not paying directly, but if they don't co-create to add value, they're not going to execute on their strategy and they're not going to win in the market. And they have complementers and the like. So that led to the the report last year was really the what is going on. And we again coined a term that we knew resonated with the C-suite, because they've been operating in business ecosystems for a long time. And their strategies have involved business ecosystems, and there's place in the ecosystem, but it hasn't been brought down to the workforce or applied to the workforce. And that was an easy transition for executives to make the connection, like, oh, you're right, we do have a workforce. And that led to this year's report, which was moving from the what and the why to the how. So how do you actually orchestrate it? Because we already have moved beyond the acknowledgement. We are running organizations as an ecosystem, but we didn't even know it. And now what? And oh, by the way, the pandemic comes and the great resignation or the great reimagination or the great reset. And now everyone is frantically looking for workers. And I can't tell you how many organizations are calling us to say, and Balaji knows this because he's right in the middle of it, is, can you please come help us get our arms around all the contingent workers or the contractor workers and our entire workforce ecosystem? And it's just starting, you know, now the big aha moment and the light bulbs going off, and we're helping, and we're excited about the research being a way to introduce a frame and a model to go on the journey of really getting your arms around orchestrating an ecosystem that's as expansive as it really is for most organizations. And then finally, as we mentioned in the book, we got so excited about the research. We said, why not write a book on this? Because there's so much to write about. And we had so many years of research, interviews, survey data that we just submit the manuscript and it'll come next year. So that's kind of how we got here. A little long-winded for the history, but I want to make sure that you have the context, and it kind of comes through when we get into some of the details here. So how do we define a workforce ecosystem? I basically alluded to it. It's focused, it's a structure focused on value creation. I'm going to read this. For an organization that consists of complementarities and interdependencies, This structure encompasses actors from within the organizations and beyond, working to pursue both individual and collective goals. That definition, while it resonates with a lot of people on the surface, when you unpack it, it becomes complex really, really quickly. It affects business strategy, not just your workforce composition, structure, org design, leadership. It starts to get into what kinds of work do we match to workers? How do workers, workforces and technology start to work together? And then there's huge questions around culture. When you have an expansive workforce, what do you do about a culture that goes beyond just your permanent internal employees, when most of my permanent employees are actually working with external workers? And then ultimately, from the customer's point of view, how do they experience my organization, our brand, and the end-to-end kind of experience, and how do all the people who touch our organization carry and reflect that into the customer's eyes and into the greater society's view of us? So culture, and then DEI becomes a huge question around this movement around DEI, but so many organizations are only focused on the internal workforce, and yet maybe missing a tremendous opportunity with what could be a much more diverse, diverse workforce if you look at the internal and external, and a way to bring diverse perspectives in or accelerate their goals around DEI if you look more expansively. So these are all the kinds of topics we've been looking at and questioning as part of, when you pull the thread on workforce ecosystems, kind of what does it mean to an organization, and then the so what of how do you get your arms around all of this. Just going to give you a little bit on the methodology here, and then we'll get into the model itself, and I'll hand it to Jeff. So we surveyed different groups, and what's interesting about this, and it was sort of alluded to earlier, is how early days this is. You know, we all are trying to inspire and change the world here, or the business, the work world anyway, in this context. And you know, so we came up with this index of how, an index around how intentional these organizations are orchestrating this expansive workforce in their organization. We asked the question around to what extent do you view all the groups, all the different groups that make up your workforce? To what extent do you take an integrated approach to managing them? So think coordinating, leading across all those contributors, and then really around how prepared are they to manage a workforce as they move forward on things like strategy formulation and the like. And while these percentages actually, and we haven't spent a lot of time discussing it, you know, other than looking through we've spent a ton of time talking about it. But as you look at these, I still scratch my head and go, is it really 22% of organizations are intentionally orchestrating all of this? And I would say, I don't think we're there yet. I mean, this number, we had a sample size, we talked to a lot of progressive organizations. Of course, we surveyed it, but it is, I would caution, there's a relativity of how intentional they are. And I do think it's still early days, but the recognition that they need to do it. And that really it is so critical. And there's an awakening here. And it's pretty immediate and obvious when you engage them. But now that we are putting a model out, we hope that that will actually help us calibrate to what extent people are really, or organizations are really orchestrating. But this is a bit of a baseline index for us. 22% were intentional, 60% partial. And again, partial means a lot of different things. And then 18% are just flat out acknowledging they're not orchestrating it at all. So that's kind of our starting point. We'll continue to monitor this. I'll just quickly go through a couple more, points around the data on here. So what happens if you're an intentional orchestrator? Well, you're basically more likely to coordinate across functions in the management of your ecosystems. All different groups are always kind of in a very fragmented way, trying to find different workers to come work on behalf of their business in different parts of their organization. So they're more likely to be coordinating it cross-functionally. And of course, the actors in that and the leadership is so important as you work from the top of the house or the organization down into the functions. The last one I'll say on the methodology and the observation, and then Jeff, I might ask you to comment on a couple of examples, which I think will bring this to life, is when we really looked at the intentional orchestrators, those are the ones who stood out though with how they think about their business strategy with their workforce strategy. And what we're finding is that, normally historically, business strategy was set, and then they turned over to typically HR to say, go get the people and hire them and get them in the organization, and off we go. And of course, we've evolved beyond that for sure. But what we're seeing now is that there's a bilateral relationship between, workforce strategy doesn't always have to follow business strategy. In fact, if you can access a population of workers and access them, that can actually shape your business strategy and shape your ability to disrupt others faster. And so we're seeing more and more dialogue in the C-suite that's saying, well, if we can get this workforce with this skill set or this set of experiences, or if these teams can come together and co-create something of amazing value and differentiated value, that's actually the lead dog in business strategy right now for organizations. And so that's quite an interesting flip that we're looking at and trying to pursue with the research and with the clients that we're working with. Jeff, do you want to bring that to life a little bit?
I will try. And Robin, thanks for kicking this off. I mean, even though I know it, I've been working on it for 3 years, I love the discussions that we're having. I think they're very interesting. And, a lot of what we've been talking about, and John, I think about our discussions in the last couple of years, certainly with Balaji and others who are part of this group, we're trying to find ways of framing the world that see the world the way it is and the way it's developing, not the way it was. When we define workforce ecosystems, part of the challenge is that most business leaders, when we ask that question, what is the workforce, think, oh, well, it's my employees. And then they think, well, oh, wait a minute, it's not just my employees, right? It's the contractors, and it's the consultants that work with me, and it's the people developing ancillary services. And, it's our good friends at NASA who, had no problem saying, oh, and it's the machines too, right? The bots are part of the workforce. You mean that too, right? And well, of course we mean that too, but that's not what we think about when we start the discussion. This is a much, it's 7:30 for me in Tel Aviv, so I'm sort of wound up. It's not like Link, who's in Arizona, so he's still drinking his morning coffee. It's a very yeasty brew. It's a very interesting conversation that we're having. And where we've tried to shift in our research this year is, we started with what does it mean to manage workforce ecosystems? And we began to realize that management wasn't really even maybe the right word. Right? Because we weren't sure that you could manage an ecosystem in the same way that you might orchestrate an ecosystem. And I think in the report, we actually talk about why, or maybe it's the book, I can't remember, but I think it's a report, why we use the word orchestrate very deliberately, and how orchestration is a form of influence and coordination, which becomes important both inside and outside the organization as well. And when just two other comments, and I'll go into the structure here. As we talked, what we tried to do, I mean, we called it an index, an orchestration index. We were originally thinking about some version of a maturity model, but we didn't think that we had enough data to do a maturity model. But we did think that we were learning something about what early adopters are doing. That's another way of thinking about it, right? Intentional orchestrators are early adopters, people that are organizations that are beginning to ask questions about how do we organize and incent and integrate internal and external workforces? How do we use marketplaces both in the organization and through our ecosystem to access and move talent and resources and ideas around? And what we saw, which is no surprise to this group, is early adopters and intentional orchestrators were doing different stuff, right? They were more likely to have this very integrated view, which is reflected in this model. They were certainly more likely, when asked the question, who is your workforce, to talk about a whole continuum and not just a very small slice of it. They had a view that the workforce both enabled and drove strategy as well as supporting strategy. So that was sort of the idea that we were developing. And when we talk to companies that are mentioned in the report, Novartis, MetLife, Unilever, what they have in common is they wouldn't call themselves this, but they are intentional orchestrators. They recognize that they need to be thinking differently about how they lead and manage and use technology. And that's basically what we highlight in this model that I'll just take 5 minutes on to go through. So, because we're all, consultants and academics and researchers, it took a long time to come up with what looks like a very simple model, this hexagon.
Jeff, can I ask you a quick question?
Of course.
Jeff, what was their trigger or stimulus to choose to act that way? Why are they doing it and why aren't others doing it?
Sorry, what was the reason people were intentional orchestrators? Is that your question?
Yeah. What is the trigger that made them act that way?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. That's a really interesting question. We actually didn't ask that question, but it's I'm thinking about we did like 70 interviews over 3 years. I think there were a couple of aspects to it. It's a really good discussion. By the way, Robin and Allison, we should really explore this question that Balaji is raising.
I have a perspective, but go ahead.
No, go ahead. Please start then. Go ahead.
Well, I think, Balaji, it's a great question. I think, first of all, almost every one of the organizations, both that we interviewed and responded in the way they did, but certainly the ones we interviewed, were, cutting edge in terms of talent and workforce. Their chief talent officers, their chief HR, their CEO were really focused on what could we do with the workforce, and they were, how can we disrupt and how can we be proactive? And so they were very much, workforce at the center of their business, as opposed to the many, people that have kind of grown up in those roles that didn't have that forward-thinking mindset. Many were actually brought over from other parts of the organization in chief talent officer roles. So they brought a very different perspective there. I think that's one. And then I think the other piece was, there's in the research, you can see, Unilever will say, we have 150,000 people on our balance sheet of full-time employees or part-time, 3 million in their ecosystem. And they actually went through the exercise of identifying and getting their arms around it, because they had someone who was so curious, even before we got into this research, that they had something much bigger and they had so many, issues and opportunities with that. NASA, another one, as Jeff said, only 1/3 of their workforce are government employees. The rest is, contractors, their extension, their partners, their collaborators. And then, of course, the Mayo Clinic was another one. As the CEO of the hospital, they knew stepping into the role that they're working with a network of medical providers, hospital systems, practitioners, doctors, nurses, and practitioners who are affiliated with many different entities. So there are some who just knew right away. We just had never coined the term around it. And then there's others who have just hadn't even thought about it yet.
I apologize for saying this way, Balaji. I think it's a really big question, and just to build on that, and just to take just a couple minutes on this, so we can open it up for questions. I'll briefly talk about this model. It came out of our research and is in the paper and in the book. I think it's the recognition that the workforce is not just your employees. It's the recognition that in order to access, in order to develop, in order to build relationships with this new kind of workforce, that you needed to have different practices. And I think it was also the realization that their business actually was created in part, our businesses and organizations are in part created by who and what the workforce is. So I think they began to see these questions, and they're very successful. Just go back to the last page for 1 second. So part of what we recognized was, the way I think of it is, there's like 3 axes here. There's the leadership axis, which is the most senior leaders, the C-suite in the organization, and then the business unit leaders, the people actually leading the line. And what we looked at was, what are C-suite leaders doing? What are the decisions that is made by the executive team? What are some, we have a section, we don't have it in this report, but in the book, about what's happening at the board level. What are the board responsibilities when you think about this, which is more think about policy, think about strategy. And then how do we train and develop leaders who are leading and managing and accessing the workforce ecosystem to get their work done? Then we have what I call the shoulders of the model, which is the sort of the top horizontal line, which is, I'll call it a continuum from human resources to procurement, but literally putting them together and saying, if this is the workforce, this conglomeration of people and technology and all these different employment models, we need to connect HR and procurement and a whole bunch of other teams in order to wrap our arms around this and to orchestrate it. We also need, this is what I call the leg sometimes of the model, we need for certainly IT and finance and legal and others to, in an integrated way, work with this procurement and HR team and with our business leaders. So we looked at what the stakeholders are. If you go to the next page, and then I'll just make...
Jeff, John has his hand up. Did you want to ask a question now, John? Oh, you might be on mute.
Yeah, no, I have a couple of people I want to call on because they're doing some of this work, and so when we get to questions, I'd love to ask that.
I'm going to make one more. I'm going to make one comment, John, and I'll hand it back to you. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, just to summarize. So the second thing we looked at were, again, we're all, some of us are either pretend to be or trying to be academics or researchers, but we're certainly students of what's happening. We not only looked at who these 6 groups were, but we looked at sort of 4 dimensions, 4 levels of what is involved in orchestration, starting with management practices. How do we go from attract, develop, retain, the sort of traditional life cycle model for employees, to a new model of access, grow it and develop and engage, right? And sort of what are all those new management practices? It's sort of a from-to framework. What does it mean for technology? We actually are positing a whole different view of how technology might look in a workforce ecosystem world. Work tech, we talk about work tech, workforce tech, workplace tech, credentialization tech, hats off for Gorovich and the smart recruiter team and smart resume team, and all those groups. And then also, tech as talent, tech as part of the workforce. What we call integration architecture, think about that sometimes in terms of organizational strategy, centralization, decentralization in a world that's highly connected. And then finally, what does this mean for leadership, right? And all of its dimensions. And so those are the things that we're looking at from an orchestration perspective, right? How do your management practices change? How do your technology enablers change? How do your organization strategies, integration change, and how do your leadership change? So with that, it always takes a few more minutes than we thought. Let me hand it to you, John, and I think you're going to call on some people and ask some questions.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Robin. This is super awesome. And I just wanted to make sure that I got a chance to call on a couple people, because I think there's some people in this community that are doing amazing work. And I think, first of all, I want to call on Dan Beck, because Dan, you and I had a conversation about this with your AstraZeneca work. And I think, one of the things that I feel like super important in this orchestration is, and you really pointed out, is this kind of identification like what is the ecosystem, right? Who is in the ecosystem? I don't know if you can share some of that work that you shared with me on you know, the findings you had with AstraZeneca, but really interesting.
Yeah, it's thank you, John, and it's just fascinating, and I love the research, Robin. Well done, Jeff, walking through it. You know, we're fine. I mean, we're in the trenches, right, as a startup trying to serve companies with orchestrating these ecosystems. I love the language of orchestrating. You know, what we're seeing is that the kind of systems we're replacing will capture less than 10% of that external working population. So systems like a traditional vendor management system. And so AstraZeneca, as John just noted, you know, they have, I don't know, 2,500 workers in SAP Fieldglass. They, in production today, have 34,000 workers across 100 countries in Utmost. And so we're just seeing this, vast amount of working populations. I love the co-creation point. And that's the challenge. And I like the axes, Jeff, because it's kind of a jump ball, right? And when we started the business 3.5 years ago, we're like, surely the head of HR is going to care. But then it's procurement's problem. And then, the legs of your axes, like IT is like, we have a problem here. Like I just got a current state architecture diagram from a massive healthcare concern out near you guys. And they have 10 different categories of non-employed labor, and they're not sure what to do with them. And so it's just fascinating. John Windsor, thank you for the teaser. I feel like I'm really grateful to John Healy to get me in here, and that I'm at least today not so scared that I actually joined the breakout session and made the session today. Thank you for the second try. But it's fascinating. I'd love to partner with the folks on this call, in general, from technical and orchestrating ecosystem. I used to, I spent 10 years of my career at Workday building out the technology platform for, I think, one of the world's best HR systems of record. But, we were focused on one population, employees and employers, and that was it. And yet, we talked a lot about organizational agility, but that was like within the four walls of an organization. What we're talking about here is really, hundreds of companies coming together, different business entities coming together to co-create, to get work done. And it's fascinating. It's just fascinating. And I think enterprises need help, but I haven't seen, I'd love to see the 22%. I'd love to meet some of those folks because, interestingly, 2 of the 5 companies you've mentioned here are customers of ours right now. And we're not yet seeing that next strategic view. It's more like we've got to clean up in aisle 9, and Utmost is helping with that. So, I think getting the thought leadership out there, helping these senior leaders see what's possible, and they'll run a better workforce, and it'll be better for the talent and better for the enterprise. So I think it's super exciting.
Sometimes, Dan, I love it. Sometimes the leaders in the field are cleaning up the mess on aisle 9.
Right. I mean, well,
Exactly.
It's kind of funny because when I look at your vertical axis, the leadership axis, it's the line of business people are creating the problem, right? And then the legs are trying to catch up to it to provision and provide access. Nature is like, what's happening here? I thought this was procurement's problem. And the CEO's like, why haven't we already done this? Right? It's like, it's a perfect axis, excuse me.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. And hey, before we go any further, because I know we're short on time, but I wanted to call out Akil Seth, because Akil's doing exactly this at UST, built a center of excellence, with the support of Diane and Barry and Bryn. But I don't know, I know, Jeff and Rob, you haven't had a chance to meet Akil. He did the talk last week and with Vinod, his partner there, and I'll make sure that you guys get a recording of it. But I don't know, Akil, I'd love to get your input, because you're in the trenches actually doing this at an organization of creating a center of excellence and trying to orchestrate talent from platforms.
Totally. Thank you. And Diane, of course, please jump in as well. I'm sure you'll have more intelligent ways to say what I'm about to say. But no, thank you for the presentation. That was awesome. The research is incredible. This idea of orchestration is really is definitely a challenge that it's bringing all those stakeholders in on the same vision is a difficult thing. And I think the biggest challenge really is that there's already an engine running that brings talent from one place to another. And that's pretty well established. Everyone's very familiar with it. Breaking that cycle and encouraging people to adopt new methods, new practices, and new thinking, it's uncomfortable. And we found that well, obviously different stakeholders have different stakes in the matter, and so our messaging varies quite, like, from our leadership to our HR. They just have different agendas. So yeah, I'll stop there so that, well, Diane, you have a chance to add.
Yeah, thank you, Akil, and yeah, everyone here can appreciate the importance, but also the challenge of the journey, and it's not an overnight journey. To Akil's point, I love just the elegance of the framework that the Deloitte and MIT and Gloat have put together. Just really, I think, does a beautiful job simplifying what is a complex undertaking. To Akil's point, you have to begin the journey within an organization based on where everyone is, and understand where they want to end up, and the complexities and the nuances of things like compensation plans, agreements, operating norms, performance targets. All of that needs to be threaded into the shift plan. It's navigable, but you need to make sure that you bring the entire team along with you in that journey, and that you don't break performance or perceptions in that journey. But it's a necessary journey. Really, the ecosystem model is a necessary outcome of the platform economy that we're seeing. And so the level of interconnectivity, the level of interdependence is increasing, and organizations, in order to survive at this pace in the digital economy, necessarily have to begin to and be able to reach outside of their organization and across their organization in much more precise and efficient ways to execute value creation. But there's a big perception of risk. There's a compliance factor that needs to be designed in that journey. And what I love about the journey, the transformation that Akil is leading for UST, is that it factors in all of the options that are necessary in order to successfully orchestrate across the full spectrum of value creator kind of actors, if you will. So that the UST vision is just really emblematic, I believe, of the successful organization of the future. And Akil is doing a really nice job bringing all of those stakeholder groups along with him in that journey.
Well, and doing that as well, not just for the internal UST organization, but for the external organizations, which is your customers,
Right.
in that broader ecosystem. So having someone who's sitting in the middle of the process, engaging it on all ends, is a really cool part of the story. So we'll look forward to kind of continuing that, or hearing the continuation of that journey. Akil, we'll tap into you, and Jeff and Robin and Allison. Thank you guys for sharing kind of the research that came out of things. Welcome the opportunity. If any of these early leaders, if you've got the folks from Novartis and MetLife and Unilever who want to come in and talk about their story, we need to hear more people share their story and their experience of what they're going through, good and bad, what the challenges are, but also what the opportunities are that they're creating, so that we can get more adoption along the way. So we're past the top of the hour. I thank everyone for joining. If you haven't become a member, either individually or as an organization, please join CTW. Tell your friends, tell your family. Let's get more people into these calls. Let's continue the conversation and have some fun along the way. But thank everyone for all of the effort that came to joining us today and for being part of the conversation.
Cheers, thanks, everybody. It was really awesome. Jeff, Robin, really great stuff. And Allison as well.
For having us.
Yep, great to have you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.